Kia ora, I'm Chelsea Daniels, and this is The Front Page, a daily podcast presented by the New Zealand Herald. The recovery operation at the Mount Maunganui landslide continues, with police warning it could take days or even weeks. Tauranga City Council has launched an investigation into what happened in the run-up to the deadly landslide, and already questions are being asked about who knew what and when. We'll talk to University of Canterbury Senior Lecturer in Disaster Risk and Resilience, Dr. Tom Robinson, about the danger of landslides after severe weather events. But first on the front page, NZ Herald senior investigative reporter Michael Morrah has been in Mount Monganui for several days and joins us now. First off, Mike, you've been to the site. Tell me, what is it like?
It's incredibly sad, actually. You have workers, police, USAR, digger drivers, truck drivers, including families, all at the site. You see a constant stream of police officers and trucks moving in and out of the site as they're continuing this process to recover the remains of the missing. What they're doing is a process called delayering, which is essentially going through the rubble and making the necessary checks. At the same time, you are seeing family members go through and return incredibly distraught. And you know, it is just heartbreaking to see. If you can even begin to imagine, and I can't imagine what this would be like, to be at that campground when this landslide came down, knowing your loved one is trapped beneath the rubble and hoping and praying that they will be rescued, and then just not knowing. So you're dealing with that enormous trauma and shock, and then hours and days of wondering, will they be brought out alive? I mean, it's just unimaginable.
You've spoken to people on the ground. What have they said?
Well, I've spoken to lots of people on the ground. I think the most pertinent piece of information that we have now verified through various interviews is that early that morning, there were signs of the hillside deteriorating, very clear signs. We know that teacher Lisa McLennan, she's a tutor, Morrinsville Intermediate, and she had a small slip, hit the back of her camper van at some point in the night. It woke her up. According to another witness, she told him it sounded like an earthquake. And so she then went about waking up other campers, including a man called Lance McFarlane, to warn them to get out, and explained to Lance McFarlane that I had to wake you up, and I'm sorry about this, but if I didn't wake you up and something happened, I wouldn't be able to live with that. Sadly, Lisa McLennan, who spent all night trying to get others to safety, then went into the ablution block shortly before that major slip came down at 9:31 a.m. and was buried in the rubble. She is one, of course, of the 6 missing in this tragedy.
Well, presumably to warn others.
Absolutely. She took it upon herself, and it was in fact on day one, just hours after this tragedy, that I was on the scene and gathering interviews with some hotel owners who lived just directly across the road. This was when the cordon was a bit smaller. And a woman came up to me, obviously another camper. She was in tears, and she just said to me, "You need to know that a woman who is now stuck in that ablution block with the debris on top of it was a hero. She did all she could to try and wake people up and get them to safety, and now she's missing." So that was the first insight as a journalist that I got to the early warning signs. We know for a fact that Lisa McLennan, according to Lance McFarlane, who of course credits Lisa with saving his life and that of his daughter, we know that she went to the campground office early that morning to try and notify them and the campground manager, this council-owned campground of course, that there was a major problem. No one was there. She tried to call the after hours number. That went through to security, but no one turned up. In fact, Lance McFarlane said the first time that campground staff were at the office was around 8:30. We also know at 7:42 a.m. On the morning of the slip, there's a photograph that was taken by another passerby, and that shows a council golf cart with the campground manager and another council person, driving past. In the words of Lance McFarlane, they did tell the campground manager about what was going on, but he says they seem more concerned about a major slip that had already come down behind the surf club. Of course, that slip was some distance from the surf club. It was not a threat to life or property at that time. But certainly at no stage was there any formal evacuation notice. And what I mean by formal is there was no alert with police or FENS or civil defence saying, get out now, despite there being various calls to authorities raising concerns. So I guess it is a tragic situation, and it appears one that could have been avoided had authorities acted sooner when they got that information.
We were actually having breakfast on the corner and then heard it all happen. Kind of went over straight away, tried to help out where we could.
How did you help?
We were ripping a few tents open. A lot of people were pretty out of it. There's a lady screaming. I think her kids or something might have been involved. And a couple of young fellas looking for their mate. And another guy was actually shouting out where his wife was, I think, or she was in there. Couldn't help too much, but kind of did what we could.
I suppose that there are still obviously a lot of questions to be answered about the timeline of events that morning, and it looks like you and our colleague Alana have pieced together a lot of them. Tauranga City Council has launched an independent review into this. Do you think many of those questions will be answered then?
Look, I think with the plethora of inquiries, there is the independent review with the City Council. I know that Prime Minister Christopher Luxon has referred to, doing a review as well. Police are doing an investigation to establish whether there's any criminal liability, and you've also got WorkSafe doing an investigation. Always with these reviews, you will get a timeline. We will know precisely what occurred, even though, through the Herald's journalism, we have already started to paint a picture of precisely what happened there. So, I do think we will get some answers. Speaking to Mahi Drysdale, Tauranga's mayor, down there at the scene, he accepts that there are legitimate questions, and he's given a full commitment to providing answers to those questions in a public forum. I did put to him that isn't it already obvious that there have been significant failings in this situation? He did not accept that, saying, as other ministers are saying at the moment, that we need to wait until we've got all the facts before we draw conclusions.
And of course, we still need to say that 6 people remain unaccounted for. Can you explain to us a little bit why, though, that wording is used?
Well, I guess the key thing here is that you have the families at the site. We know that their loved ones were there, and we know that those people did not make it out. Unaccounted for, I guess, because there is a very complex and potentially long process involving the coroner, and the chief coroner spoke a bit about this. And the issue here is that the remains of those missing have to be recovered, and then there is an identification process. Now, that process can take a long time, and the chief coroner has explained this to the families, in part because of the serious injuries sustained by those missing, and it is important, according to the coroner, that the correct people are returned to the correct family. And in disasters overseas, she says there has been cases where human remains have been returned to someone and it's the wrong person, and they don't want to make those sort of mistakes. So unaccounted for is the word used at the moment. As soon as those victims have been formally identified and remains returned to the families, then it's sort of confirmation of their passing.
Thanks for joining us, Mike.
Pleasure, thank you.
Joining us now is University of Canterbury Senior Lecturer in Disaster Risk and Resilience, Dr. Tom Robinson, to discuss what we can learn from this disaster. First off, Tom, do you think that we as New Zealanders are just far too complacent when it comes to the dangers of landslides?
I don't know if it's that we're too complacent. I think landslides are an incredibly complex hazard, and they're one that's probably underrepresented or less thought about. We think about the big hazards that we experience, the big earthquakes, the volcanoes, which are obviously fairly obvious in the landscape, and flooding. And landslides, although they're fairly common and almost deadly hazard, we tend not to think about them as much. I think that's primarily because, unfortunately, sadly, when they do kill people, it's only in ones and twos. This recent one at Mount Maunganui 6 is tragic, and probably quite a large number for what it used to. Whereas you compare that to big earthquakes, we're talking about tens and hundreds. So I think it's not that we don't pay them enough attention, but it's they're just not part of our psyche, and they happen constantly. And so it's a slow drab. I think one way to think about it is like car crashes. We talk often about our roads and we focus on that holiday period, but people are being killed on our roads all the time, unfortunately. And so it's that constant process of just ones or two small numbers, and that makes them really difficult to focus attention on. This event has really tragically focused that attention, and so hopefully that can provide some good outcome. Will be a better focus on landslides going forward.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because I was thinking about this morning, and I mean, we have earthquake drills in schools now, of course, after 2010, 2011 quakes in Christchurch, and I think everyone would at least know the very basics of what to do when an earthquake strikes. But I'm speaking for myself here. I would have literally no idea what to do if I saw earth moving like what we saw in those photos and videos from Mount Maunganui. Do you think we need more education, perhaps in schools or just generally, about what to do in those situations?
Yeah, I mean, there's really good education that's going on, exactly as you say, around earthquakes. We've also got tsunamis, right, long or strong, get gone. And I think you're right, people do know those behaviours. Landslides is much more complicated. They tend to be typically much more rapid. You don't have much warning that they're coming, and really the best thing to do is to try and get out of the way. And that's unfortunately that's not often possible. So I think that we do need a bit more education around that, but it's probably more around looking for the signs of landslides, particularly where we've got slopes that are unstable and are looking to progress towards failure. There's reports from this one where people had seen previous or smaller slips. There've been lots of muddy water coming out. That's all really good signs that the landslides are, or that the land is unstable. So I think it's the education there we need to really work on is a better general understanding of the hazards we have, not just earthquakes, flooding, tsunami, but then also, exactly as you say, those actions to take, those key things to look out for, and then what to do when you do spot those signs.
Right. So, what are some of those signs? And I suppose what makes landslides so complex? And do we kind of know where they're prone to happening, or are they just really erratic?
Great question. So landslides are extremely complicated. It's essentially a fight between gravity and friction. So gravity is trying to pull material off the slope, and friction is trying to keep it all together. And so that's constantly changing and evolving. So we have really steep slopes. You've got gravity is acting more on the slope, and so it's more likely. But the real challenge we have with landslides is knowing exactly where and, importantly, when they're going to occur. That's the challenge that we face. So we have reasonably good understanding of the processes that cause landslides. We understand to a degree where they are more or less likely to occur. But the challenge really is that when. And that's the real difficulty that we in the research community in particular have at the moment. So we take this particular slope in Mount Maunganui at the moment. So we know there was a slide there in the 1970s. But as far as I'm aware, there doesn't seem to have been any instability since. And that includes Cyclone Wilma in 2011, includes Cyclone Gabrielle and the Auckland anniversary storms. This Wednesday this happened was the wettest day on record, so that's probably a good sign that's happened there. But this is the challenge. Even when we tend to know where landslides are or where they're likely to occur, actually figuring out exactly when that's going to happen, that's the real tricky part, and that's something that we're still trying to grapple with.
Yeah, because we do see those, like people monitoring earthquakes, for example. They'll say, oh, there's a chance that this will happen within the next 10 years, etc., just because of the data that they've got through the ground moving and stuff. So I suppose, and they're not always accurate, right? But they give you a pretty good idea. But yeah, with landslides, it would be, how would you even do that?
That is the challenge. That is probably one of the big challenges in landslide research at the moment. So we're pretty good at developing models. So we can look back at previous events. We can look at Cyclone Gabrielle. We can look at the Kaikoura earthquake, where we've had large landslides triggered. I think we've got some of the largest landslide inventories in the world in New Zealand because we have them so commonly. So we can use those to figure out where landslides are likely to occur, but it's still that timing issue that's really critical. So earthquakes, obviously, we can't predict earthquakes. We can estimate this is where an earthquake is likely to occur, this is where the shaking might be, and therefore where landslides might be. But until that earthquake happens, you don't know. Storms, you can see those storms coming. We've got pretty good short range and even long range forecasting now, so we can start to get better at that. But even then, it's still really hard to say exactly when a landslide might occur. And I think the Mount Monganui slide here is a really good example. If you look at the videos, this appears to have occurred after the rainfall, during blue skies, a period when people might think, okay, that the danger's passed. And I think that's the other difficulty here with landslides, is sometimes that failure starts quite slowly and accelerates over time, and that time can take a matter of minutes, a matter of hours, potentially even days. So again, it's that timing thing that's a real challenge for us, and that's probably one of the key research questions that we globally we're trying to answer at the moment.
When it comes to landslides, I've always been curious. If you see the earth moving above you, is it really quick? Like, because they say that once you see a tsunami, for instance, coming towards you, then you can't run out of the way. But does it differ between landslides, whether how quick they actually move?
Yeah, it does. So landslides, the other difficulty with them is they take very different forms. So there's lots of different styles of motion or styles of failure. So you can have something like this, which is quite wet and slides quite quickly, and then transitions into a flow. So it kind of looks like water, but it's actually lots of mud. You can then get rockfall, where you get individual boulders falling downhill and bouncing towards you. Avalanching, where you get looks like a snow avalanche, but it's comprised of rock. And then you can also get these really slow creeps that just move a couple of millimeters, maybe a couple of centimeters every hour or every day or so. So they're really variable. But if you see a slip, if you see the earth moving, the best thing you can possibly do is just get out of that area as fast as possible. And I mean, the obvious thing there is landslides travel downhill. They typically take the fastest direct route downhill. So moving quickly away, laterally, horizontally away from that slide. So if you're on a road or if you're on a walking path and you come and you see that starting slide, go back the way you came and as quickly as possible to get to a safe distance.
And moving horizontally as well. I mean, I wouldn't have thought of that, but that would make sense, wouldn't it? If you're getting out of its way kind of thing. That's a really good point to make. In terms of these severe storm events, they're becoming more common, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that is driven by climate change. So as the atmosphere warms up, you have the ability for, firstly, the atmosphere can hold more moisture. So therefore, if it can hold more moisture, you can have higher, more intense rainfall. But it's also the frequency that those storms are coming. And you only have to look over the last 5-10 years to really see how much that's picked up in New Zealand. Like, I think all of our minds are drawn back to Cyclone Gabriel in 2023, but there's been plenty of floods and storms since then. I mean, the East Cape has been particularly badly affected over the last several years. So, yeah, this is one of the consequences of climate change. As the atmosphere starts to warm, more moisture, more storms form. Therefore, we'll get more intense rainfall. That more intense rainfall is going to lead to more landslides and larger numbers. Spread all across the areas that are going to be affected. And that's part of living in New Zealand. We live in the roaring 40s. Tropical cyclones or ex-tropical cyclones, large southerly storms coming through is part of living here. But they are becoming more frequent. And so we should expect to see these kind of large-scale landslide events more frequently as the storms increase.
It has been a tough start to the year for many people who have been impacted by the recent weather event across the North Island. Tragically, we have lost 9 people in the weather event and 1 person remains missing. To the families who have lost their loved ones at Mount Maunganui, Welcome Bay and Warkworth, and the family of a man who is still missing near Apotiki, our hearts and our thoughts are with you all. Over the last few days, Mark Mitchell and I have visited a number of communities across the North Island and seen firsthand the devastation. Some people have lost their homes and their livelihoods, and others have been isolated after major roads have failed. While this weather event is not of the scale of Cyclone Gabriel in terms of the number of people affected, for those who have been affected, the impact is significant.
In terms of looking at and mitigating landslide risk, I mean, I know that we don't know how or when when they're going to happen, right? Should we know places where not to have campgrounds, where not to have buildings by now?
Probably yes. I think we understand the kinds of locations where landslides are likely to occur, and we understand the kind of regions that they're likely to run out to. So we should be able to identify those zones, and that's a fair question around, should we actually be more acutely looking at the places that we inhabit. Timing is always going to be the issue, but I think that's the conversation that we need to have is, should we be living in these zones? Should we be, having tourist sites in these zones? Should we be having roads or whatever recreational facilities that might be? The difficulty there, though, is it's not just landslides that we've got to think about. We've got to think about flooding. We've got to think about coastal inundation. We've got earthquakes. We've got volcanoes. We're a beautiful island nation because of all of these hazards. That makes it difficult, though, to decide where is safe to live. And the reality is there's never going to be somewhere that is perfectly safe to live or to camp. So we need to actually take an all hazards approach. We can't just say, we're not going to live at the bottom of this slope because there's potential for landslides, because moving somewhere else might move you on closer to a fault or closer to a volcano or onto a floodplain. So we really actually need what I would call an all hazards approach, where we really look at where all of the potential hazards are, how likely they are, and what the impacts of those hazards are likely to be, to try and decide where the safest location is. And safest doesn't mean no risk, and that's something that we have to, as a nation, accept, is that there's always going to be some risk, but trying to find what is the lowest risk, and what is the lowest risk that we're prepared to live with and we're prepared to accept as a nation. That's the challenge.
And in terms of the slope at Mount Maunganui and that ground there, could that ever be considered safe again?
I mean, it's difficult to know without a detailed geotechnical report here of what's actually happened at this site. It's going to be difficult to know. It's hard to rehabilitate slopes, for want of a better term, so mitigating them back to it. We know that the type of rock there, it's a rhyolite, which is a type of volcanic rock that's particularly prone to landsliding under heavy rainfall, and we've seen that, right? It's not just this slope. The whole of Mount Monganui has experienced slips. The walking tracks were closed. any major rainstorm that comes through there causes slips. So whether or not that slope can be rehabilitated, for want of a better term, or put back as it was, remains to be seen. I think there's probably larger issues there around whether that's even appropriate, given what's happened up there. And that will need to be something that's discussed and thought about wider with the local community, local iwi, people affected, to really think about the land use around there and what's appropriate.
Thanks for joining us, Tom.
Thank you.
That's it for this episode of The Front Page. You can read more about today's stories and extensive news coverage at nzherald.co.nz. The Front Page is hosted and produced by me, Chelsea Daniels. Kane Dickey is our studio operator, Richard Martin, our producer and editor, and our executive producer is Jane Yee. Follow The Front Page on the iHeart app or wherever you get your podcasts, and join us next time for another look beyond the headlines.